Morning. Thanks for coming. I'm Eric Ostomchuk. I'm the vice chair of DCTMA, and I'm with TPD. Today we have Joe Natale, PE, the assistant manager of the TASA program of the DBRPC. Joe is the assistant manager of the program at DBRPC and has 17 years of experience as a civil engineer in the Pennsylvania and Delaware transportation industries. Joe received his bachelor's and bachelor's and master's of civil engineering at the University of Delaware. Prior to joining DBRPC, Joe was a structural engineer in private and public transportation organizations. In his spare time, Joe is a developer, woodworker, and board gamer. That's interesting. Joe and his partner Janine live in Bucks County with their first baby Meadow, first human baby Avery, and their newest agent of chaos, Rory. So please help me welcome Joe to the podium here, who's going to be talking about the Regional Sidewalk Development Program.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Our slides together. Go back. Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Joe Natale, the System Manager of the PA TASA program at DBRPC. And if you don't know what TASA is, we'll get into that. I'm here today to present on the Regional Sidewalk Development Program, do some information sharing, talk about funding opportunities, specifically about TASA. That is what I do for my day job, so I'll be talking a lot about that, but presenting on a couple different sections within DBRPC. For those of you that don't know about our Connections 2050 plan, there are many different sections of it, but specific to sidewalks, we're looking to fill 25% of the regional sidewalk gaps, specifically new facilities. We have a bunch of different ways, and if you were in the session earlier with Allison and Ryan, they talked about a lot of the different resources that we have at DBRPC, and I'm going to go through a few of them and some potential upcoming ones, and then we'll, I don't expect us to go into the lunch hour, so here's our agenda today. Quick introduction of me, go through the project life cycle for typical projects, specifically sidewalks, but also touch on trails. I will introduce the upcoming DBRPC Sidewalk Gap Analysis Tool, the Sidewalk Index, talk about our Areas of Persistent Poverty grant that we applied for with SEPTA that specifically has design assistance for these types of projects. I will spend a good amount of time talking about the Transportation Alternative Set-Aside program, the TASA program, and its funding, upcoming funding opportunity. And then specific to TASA, we have technical assistance available that I will go into that I'm the manager of here at DBRPC. So introduction, that's me. I won't go into my history because that was read in my bio, but that's me. That's my contact information. There's a slide at the end with contact information again, as well as a QR code for both my email and one of the forms I'll talk about today. So again, as you might have heard in the previous session, or if you don't know, typical project life cycle goes through a number of different steps. These are very top level descriptions. So you're looking at all the planning efforts go into the planning box that can take years or even decades for some larger projects. Eventually, once they get identified as priorities, they move into preliminary engineering and final design, which itself can take a number of years depending on the level of involvement with the state and federal level. Once those get advertised and bid, they go to construction, where they will need construction funding, and then finally, as the owners of the facilities, there will be maintenance and other considerations for different types of projects that you need to be aware of. Specifically, the DBRPC Sidewalk Gap Analysis Tool, the Sidewalk Index, I'll talk about first, is a planning tool. Sidewalk Construction Index, I apologize. So you'll see on this slide, there are a number of different steps to this that DBRPC staff have taken into account when developing this tool. It is in, it is still under construction, so it hasn't been publicly released. We've used it to do some preliminary analysis, but it is region-wide. It is a screening tool for sidewalk connections. Essentially, sidewalks and sidewalk areas will get a score that will allow municipalities or the counties or the state to prioritize different projects. So it can show the priority for different road segments. It focuses on areas that have less than 50% of their sidewalks built, It does prioritize them 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest priority. And I'll show how the scoring system is currently laid out and will be tweaked. And we use the data that we have available to us. And it is a relatively computing intensive scoring system. So we've already run this analysis, and then the tool, when it becomes available, will be a simple GIS, like click and find out information tool, and then you can input your own information. So this is what it will look like on the right, not dissimilar to the PA1 map images we might have seen earlier, where you can zoom in and see different sidewalk gaps. Different colors will mean different things. This scoring rubric on the left is still being developed. It is not the final scoring. We had some additional input from our partners as to what would make a valuable criteria, but different things, I can't quite see it, like where the sidewalk gaps fall on the high injury network, their proximity to K through 12 schools, recreational facilities, bus stops, things of that nature, and then the proximity to existing sidewalks. So we don't want to just build sidewalks even if there is a gap, we don't want to build that gap out and just make smaller gaps. We want to make connections, so find logical termini for projects. So all of that would goes into this computation that then identifies different scores for different sections. So when you identify different sidewalk gaps in your municipalities, you can then use them to prioritize where the money is best spent. So we do also have the sidewalk inventory, which is a little bit more robust, but is also an older data set. So this is not necessarily used for prioritizing the same way, but you can view our regional sidewalk map at walk.dvrpc.org. You may zoom in and you'll see on this section, on this image, it's not showing up great, but there are certain areas of the map where we do not have data. The collection for this data is relatively labor intensive, so as far as costs go, we don't update it too often. However, you can provide this data to us. You can email me and I can get you that contact information, or I believe there's a way to do it on the website itself to suggest improvements. So you say, hey, we have a sidewalk here. We have a sidewalk on one side of the road, 2 sides of the road. We have ADA ramps. If you were to zoom in on there, you can click individual segments, individual corners and crossings, and anything we have data on in our database is a part of this map. You can use it to edit the pedestrian network, when that's where you would provide updates that have happened since 2018 if they're not on the map already. Analyze your pedestrian network, plan and share pedestrian projects. This is a public database, so when you make changes, they would likely need to be things that have already been constructed. This is not a planning, this is not a proposal for planning. This is things that have already been constructed. Like I said, it was last updated in 2018. Incremental updates can be emailed directly to us or updated on the website, or submitted on the website. So the Areas of Persistent Poverty Grant, which is a federal program. We see a lot, both on the planning side and in the implementation side, which is where I work, that a challenge to municipalities is the design. So design costs are very often the match for construction funding. So municipalities that maybe don't have the same amount of funding or cash flow will be more hesitant to apply for grants, for construction grants. So when we made this application with SEPTA to the Federal Transit Authority, the intent was to provide that design funding. So I believe somewhere in the $400,000 range, grant funding will provide a certain, maybe 2 or 3 projects worth of design funding to a separate for design for a separate construction funding program. There we go. So in partnership with SEPTA, we did apply and were awarded this grant from FTA. We are currently soliciting municipalities who are interested in this design. It might sound silly, but we have a hard time getting municipalities on the phone and then following through with wanting to receive this funding. And they don't actually receive it. It's not a pass-through. We will be working with SEPTA to coordinate the designer. It's just we need buy-in. We need engaged municipal partners. So it says at the bottom there, the initial discussions with municipalities that have demonstrated interest in sidewalk gaps. We are specifically looking for projects in or around SEPTA facilities, things that will connect neighborhoods to the SEPTA stations, bus stations, rail stations, things of that nature. Again, this will be covering the design costs, which is usually the match for construction. The intent being that once you have a designer underway, you could apply to another source of funding for construction. It's not set right now for construction, but for example, the TASA program, which I will be talking about in a second, would be a great source of construction funding for this program, which essentially the only costs due to the municipality would be the staff costs. So your project manager on your side of things, coordinating with the designer, and someone like myself for the construction or design and construction. As anyone who's watched the news is aware, this funding is technically subject to the FTA, so we are not expecting this to go away anytime soon, but we don't have a crystal ball, so in theory, this could go away. We have not had any indication that it's going to, so we are moving forward with SEPTA to coordinate that those project selections, and then once we have the project selections, soliciting an engineer. I don't know if you're going to be able to read. Oh, yeah, you can probably read that. So these are the using that scoring tool that's being developed. That first the construction index. We pulled the list of municipalities that both have a certain score. I forget the actual score that was used, but some threshold for scoring that have sidewalk gaps within the certain distance from a SEPTA station that also fit the persistent poverty criteria of the original grant. So this is Bucks County and Montgomery County. If you're on this list and you're in this room, please come talk to me after or send me an email and we will get you at least a conversation, a quick Zoom meeting to talk about potential projects. You're probably more interested in the Delaware County one. So this is Chester if you're on there. Let's see. Yeah, there's the Delaware County municipalities. So if you're on this list, and I can bring this slide up again maybe towards the end of the presentation for Delaware County if anyone would like to look at it. And you are interested in talking to us about the areas of persistent poverty grant, please talk to me. And I think I already covered this slide. Yeah, our municipalities that have sidewalk gaps applying for funding, usually not because it takes some amount of, there are certain costs associated with even applying for these funding sources for construction. So we're trying to minimize that. DVRBC has a couple different programs that do that thing, kind of like the supporting communities that Allison had talked about earlier. This particular grant is for the design, so it'll be more of a DVRPC staff that assists with the application process, but we want to make it as easy of a lift as possible. And I will talk about the technical assistance, which will help with that kind of interim between planning and the construction application. So my whole bag is Transportation Alternatives Set Aside TASA program. These are, they call them non-traditional transportation facilities, and I'll have a slide with all the different things that are eligible, but 90% of what we see come in are bike and pedestrian facilities. So these are non-vehicular facilities. The TASA program is a federally funded competitive program, and it is formula funded, so it is not discretionary, which is the bad word right now. So the state gets a certain amount of funding and they allocate it a certain way. The DVRPC region gets a huge chunk of it due to our population. And then there is a regional program that we get the pot of money for and we decide as a region, and then there's a statewide program. So this is a biannual program, so every 2 years except for 2020 because of the pandemic. So 2021, 2023, upcoming 2025. There are 2 rounds of selection, although it is the same application process with the same criteria, or roughly the same criteria. There's a regional selection, which happens, and then any project that doesn't get selected from the regional application pool will be sent up to the statewide level, of which we are also a part of the selection process. The selection committee, as you might imagine, is made up of all of our planning partners, so the 5 counties, Philadelphia and the 4 collar counties in Pennsylvania, DVRPC ourselves, PennDOT, SEPTA, DCD, DCNR, and the Public Participation Task Force, which is essentially made up of anyone who wants to be a part of it, but typically volunteers from our partners. Eligible projects include this list of projects. You'll notice at the top, bicycle and pedestrian facilities. As I said, both from a what gets applied for and what gets awarded, 90 to 95% of the projects are bike and pedestrian facilities. So trails, sidewalks, which is the point of this today's presentation, crossings, so ADA ramps, safe crossings, it can be pedestrian signals. We cannot pay for vehicular improvements with this program, although they could be part of the project, whether that's a different funding source, like if PennDOT is planning to redo an intersection and we want to combine that project with ours. We've done that in Concordville. We have a project where we were going to be putting in a trail, PennDOT was going to be putting in a roundabout, so they gave us their roundabout money, and then it's part of our project. Bicycle and pedestrian education are referred to as non-infrastructure projects. So that could be things like the TMAs tend to be the ones that apply for those, where they're doing outreach to schools, teaching about bicycle education and safety, or community outreach, things of that nature, and you can get funding for that. And it's not technically supposed to be staff time, it's preparation for the events, but we kind of are pretty flexible with how that works. And then there's a whole list of other activities that I'm not even going to read. They're in the slide. They're not usually what people apply for because they don't make as competitive a project, in our opinion, in the DVRPC region's opinion, but statewide, those are eligible projects. One thing that people do tend to be interested in when they see this list are the stormwater management activities. Very rarely do we get a solely stormwater project, but we do get stormwater eligible activities included in our trail projects. So for example, we're working with Lower Mankfield Township in Bucks County right now to develop a project where they got $500,000 of construction funding for a $2.5 million project. We're looking to finish that funding gap for what is essentially a sidewalk, but that sidewalk will entail a good amount of stormwater improvements along Taylorsville Road, which is the reason that they need all that extra money. The sidewalk itself wouldn't be too expensive, but the stormwater work is. We've seen vegetation management, we've seen archaeological, historical structures go up there. They typically have to have a transportation history, which is sort of more of a rarity. And then what are you doing with that? Because it still has to be bid and everything through PennDOT's ECMS. So it tends not to be as helpful. As I said, those top 3 bullets are what almost all of our projects that come in are for. The third bullet is actually just a specific type of project for the first one, because it's rails to trail projects like the Manayunk Bridge in Philadelphia. That was an old rail line that got converted into a very nice, wide structure. They actually got 2 projects, one for the construction of the facility itself, and then another for the lighting and security system that allows it to be open 24/7 instead of just during the daylight hours. This is the project or the program timeline for the 2025 round for any of those that are interested in construction funding. The next application round is set to be announced in the next month or 2 and will be open through the summer, at which point you need to submit a draft application this summer, which almost doesn't have to have anything in it other than maybe a couple lines on a plan for where you want the facility, because then you need to have a pre-application meeting with me and my staff, myself, and then final applications would be due in the fall, early winter. We then meet as a committee. The DVRPC staff, like myself and Joe Banks, manage the committee, which has separate DVRPC staff as sort of voting members, but we manage the program on behalf of PennDOT, hosting our committee meeting in the late fall, early winter, make project selections for the regional committee, and then select which projects we're going to propose to the statewide level. I then sit on the statewide committee to do the same process, but against every project in the state. You're looking at maybe 100 or so, 150 or so other projects to be competitive with or against. And then a certain amount of money will also get allocated for that pot. So we essentially have 2 different chances to get money for projects. And we can also split projects that are past the $1.5 million soft cap. The program does have a cap of $1.5 million for construction and construction inspection. But projects can exceed that if there is a demonstratable reason why they would need to be over there. For example, a bridge that is more than $1.5 million can't be cut in half. We've seen projects that come in at $3 million. They tend to be priorities for the county. The county being the ones that are on the committee are the ones that sort of rank projects within the county to then be competitive with the whole region, to then be competitive with the whole state. So where the county feels your project falls in the pecking order is very important. But we have seen some regional/state $3 million projects come in. All that is to say, then projects are selected in spring/summer of 2026 to start their arduous PennDOT process, which takes 2 to 4 years if you're lucky. Things to consider when making a TASA application. Applications, as I said, require county support almost exclusively. Right-of-way needs, environmental issues negatively impact your competitiveness of the project, but do not eliminate potential award. Especially if you can demonstrate over the time between application and award that, yes, sir?
For the county support, would that be from the planning commission or?
Yes, the planning commission. So like Peter Williamson, Lou Belmont, or not Lou Huffnagel, Gina, all of them. Like I said before, 2 to 4 year timeline for design. After you get the award in spring of 2026, 2 to 4 years is what we see for these projects. They could be done much faster. Let's say if you did them yourselves or with your own, construction funding, but because you have to do the federal process, which is the PennDOT process, it is a lot more paperwork and a lot more engineering costs. There is no construction match, as often the case with some construction funding programs, because we say the pre-construction funds need to come from the sponsor, from the applicant. So those are your engineering design costs, your right-of-way utility costs that happen before construction, things of that nature. And that is, of course, unless you get an AOPP, Areas of Persistent Poverty grant, in which case design can be covered. But when budgeting these projects, if you're not getting that AOPP grant, if you're not one of the 3 municipalities that we may end up selecting for that, you should expect 15 to 20% of the construction cost in incurred costs by your municipality. So if it's $1 million application for construction, plus some inspection money, you should expect and be able to show that you've budgeted for $200,000. That all sounds like a lot to just build some sidewalks, so it is very important that you evaluate whether or not it's worth it. This is a longer, drawn-out process, a lot more red tape. The design takes longer, which then costs more money to pay an engineering firm. And we see PennDOT costs, if you've ever bid a project through ECMS and through PennDOT, contractors bid their projects a little higher rather than a municipal level project. The same sidewalk could have a 50% increased cost. So what might cost you $400,000 might cost $700,000 with our program. Just things to keep in mind. Doesn't mean you've got 400 lying around and can just throw it at a sidewalk and not come to the program. So make sure it's worth it. Here are a couple quick examples of just some projects that we've built over the last couple of years. This is in Abington, the Jenkintown Pennypack Trail. This was something like 1.5 miles of 10-foot shared use path connecting a school and a park, and then there was another section that connected a different section of the park to some public transportation facilities like other sidewalks. This was originally one project for the side shared use path, and then the township was going to be doing some stormwater work. Like I said, it made a lot more sense. It actually saved them some money to combine them. They had to contribute the money via their other grant for the stormwater work, but we were able to combine them and get them all done at the same time. This is actually the other end of the photo that Allison showed in her presentation. This is in Lower Salford. Just, I think, maybe like 800 feet of sidewalk and pedestrian safety and crossings in Lower Salford Township. This wasn't a complicated project. It happened to go through design a little bit faster, but the facility itself it got built very nicely. It was designed, there was a lot of room on the roadway, so the projects can be relatively straightforward. They can also have obviously complications, but this is the other end of the Jenkintown Pennypack Trail project, just showing that we connected to an intersection. You can't quite see it in this photo, but that connected to an ADA, updated ADA ramp. That connected to a separate ADA crossing that connected more sidewalks throughout the township, Abington Township. This is the Tukadee Creek Bridge. That was a phase, I forget what phase number, one phase of a larger regional trail program project that is, I think, still in design right now, or is in construction, but a couple different sections of trail got broken up into many different awards. So Cheltenham Township and I think another neighboring township got these awards, and over the course of maybe 5 or 6 years got all of them funded in design and construction to then be built. And that is a pedestrian structure over Tukadee Creek, something like 120 foot structure, and then being a little over $1 million just for the structure. So all that was the construction funding, and then the design process that the construction funding had to go through is a lot. Oftentimes, as I said, oftentimes municipalities that don't just have a bunch of cash lying around are hesitant to even apply for even design funding, but specifically construction funding, if they don't know their construction funding is going to get awarded. So if you are asking for $1 million and you've already found your $200,000 for design, you still have to spend $40,000, $50,000 just to apply, just to get the conceptual engineering done and maybe some initial tasks like a cost estimate. All that costs money to pay an engineer to do and then have your staff do. So it was in the IIJA last round that we could set aside 5% of the funding for technical assistance and project development, and that's what we did. We received it from the the state level, so we didn't actually even take away from our regional pot. But it's funding that can cover these vague planning / early design tasks. And there, that's what I just said that, 5% of the statewide TASA funding. So this is a program where we issued an RFQ, selected Michael Baker as our consultant. They have a pretty strong history of success with the TASA program, and they are able to perform engineering tasks for us on behalf of municipalities. So these are the potential engineering tasks that we can perform essentially right now before an application is submitted. So when I said the summer application that's going in, they'll be announced soon and completed this summer. If you only have a project idea and you're looking to get some concept plans or estimates or things together that you just don't have the capacity for right now, come to me. There's a QR code to fill out a form to talk to me and my staff and the consultant to get that work done now at no cost to the municipality. It can cover things like cost estimation, deed and utility research, environmental research, analysis of the project constraints, conceptual plans, logical termini identification, and phasing. So when we have a project that's just too big for that $1.5 million, finding the logical place to cut it. So you apply for 1/2 now and 1/2 2 years from now or 4 years from now when the project's completed. We've also had success coordinating with PennDOT. So Delaware County had a project on McDade Boulevard that they wanted to have done, and we were able to get the right PennDOT staff on a call, get Michael Baker to weigh in, and then perform some preliminary concept plans and engineering estimates to really move the project forward a bit, and they'll be hopefully coming in for a project this summer. So that's a cost estimate. Again, I don't know how well you can see these, but these are the deliverables we've been providing to the municipalities. These are not final design plans. These are barely preliminary engineering plans, but these are good enough for the application. So rather than paying your own engineer or hiring an engineer to spend $20,000 or $50,000 to do these plans and investigation, we can do that on your behalf. Maybe it saves you half of that cost. Maybe it saves you most of that cost, and your staff takes the rest of the application to 100%. Oh, I thought I had another slide. I guess not. So that is the TASA technical assistance. I don't have a ton of other content. I can talk more about the TASA program. I could probably talk about that all day. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. The left QR code should get an email started to me to ask any questions you have about this content. The right QR code is specifically the TASA technical assistance interest form, where I will email you asking you to set up a meeting with me to hear about your project. We have capacity for at least a few more technical assistance tasks between now and the summer. They do take some time, and there's only really one team that's working on them. So, first come, first serve. We do them in order as they come in. But we should have time to complete any interest in Delaware County, at least, between now and when those applications open. And should you have any questions about the sidewalk inventory and all that information, I, of course, can pass that along to the appropriate staff at DVRPC. Cassidy Boulin is the manager of that program. Yeah. That's all I have for today. Are there any questions? Sir.
You had mentioned your borough was looking at this. Contact you. Mm-hmm. I'm from Chairman Hill, and I did see a borough listed.
Oh, there we go. There's the Delaware County municipalities. Yeah, if you're on this list and you have a project or would like to discuss potential projects near a SEPTA station, and I use that term loosely, near a SEPTA station, if it gets people to that SEPTA station, if you can make an argument that it gets people using SEPTA more, if you've heard anything today, it's that SEPTA needs more users and needs more money. So, we're helping, that's the point of this grant, is to facilitate that in areas that meet the persistent poverty criteria. So I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to pass that information along to the people running that program. I'm part of that program, but there's someone running it, not me. Yeah, please come talk or email me however you'd like to do that. Any other questions about this or the TASA program? Again, please find me afterwards. I talk about TASA all day. All right, I think we can get out a little early for lunch. I don't know if they're going to feed us yet, but get out early for lunch. Thank you. Appreciate you coming today.